Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off June 6th here, I just want to take a moment and remember, one of the greatest meteorologists the world's ever known. His name is James Stagg, and he was with the RAF, and he was a critical part of the D-Day timing, because Dwight Eisenhower had asked him and his forecast team to basically predict the best timing to do the D-Day invasion. And what was amazing about it was, with very limited observations, very limited data, he was able to construct a forecast that said we cannot go on June the 5th. That was the original date. We can't go on June the 5th because if we did, we'd not only be fighting the Axis powers, but also be fighting the winds and the waves because of just a terrible setup. But the tide had to be right, and they had to come in under good cloud cover. And his forecast said, I think as soon as this front passes through, we'll be able to get on the back side of it, still have some cloud cover, but not be fighting massive waves, and the tide will still be good. And so they did. They went on June the 6th. And it's a remarkable story about two things. One is a great forecast, and the second is just the execution of a decision by a leader based on information that was had, and that was what Eisenhower did. And so this is the day we celebrate what happened on that particular day. It's also interesting to think about this. 4 years before that, one of the things that was just amazing to see being used here was a forecast based, again, off of very limited observations. This is what the weather pattern looked like on the day of the Dunkirk rescues. So if you look across the English Channel, we had a pressure gradient that increased in this direction, which means the winds were going to go from high to low, and because of the Coriolis effect, turn to the right. So we had a southerly wind. But notice how each of the weather observations here is colored in, it's filled in, and that the cloud cover was a major part of that day as well. So not only did they have a tailwind coming back to the English coast, but also had cloud cover, which, again, just amazing how weather played an interesting role in these two historic events from World War II. And there's also one other story, but we'll have to save it for another time. It's a story about how General Curtis LeMay and the B-29 bomber discovered jet stream level winds. We'd hypothesized about them and done some early observations with weather balloons, but it was honestly when the B-29 was capable of flying at 30 to 35,000 feet that we discovered that the winds at that level were often faster than the plane could be. And it was also the reason why the B-29 had to be stationed closer to Japan for all of the attacks on Japan, and also the reason we had to stop doing our daytime high-altitude bombing. That resulted, of course, in the firestorm that happened in Tokyo with lower bombing and General Curtis LeMay's decision-making. Just an incredibly rich amount of weather history that came out of World War II. In fact, if I can make one more statement, without World War II, the advancements made in meteorology probably wouldn't have happened at the speed at which they did, because it was decommissioned ship radars that became the United States' first radar network, and it was meteorologists who had to learn about all of these things during World War II that then became the scientists that trained a whole generation of people like me. So with all of that, we arrive here, and this is the jet stream today. And what we've been paying attention to is how long this ridge lasts. You can already see that high over low sliding farther to the east, and on the back side of it, we're starting to push more flow across this critical area where there's very warm water here and very cold water to the north. And that's going to be the continual question of this pattern as we go through the month of June and beyond. So let's just get right on into it. They didn't have this back in World War II. They didn't have indexes explaining the jet stream level winds, but here they are. We continue to see the PNA climb, meaning that this west coast ridge has more days on it here through the 9th and 10th before it comes back down. And so when I'm looking to see if a pattern is truly blocked and stuck, I would look to see this staying way away from zero for an extended amount of time. And it doesn't. In fact, maybe the PNA comes back and spends a little bit of time in its negative values, and that means West Coast troughing, or at least Pacific Northwest troughing, or British Columbia troughing. So with all of that, remember, we've had a concern all spring long that we could find ourselves in a situation, I'll go back to this map, where the excessive drought that is in Mexico pushes in and helps to create more widespread ridging over Texas, over to Arizona, maybe Southern California, and then up the West Coast. And that could still be ahead of us this summer, but there are some things that are shifting around right now that start to change our ideas up a little bit. So let's get into the height pattern. Remember, the troughs are in blue, the ridges are in red, and as we play this forward, the end of our plus PNA pattern starts to break down around the 9th, and you can see that right there. Okay, So as we go through the 10th, 11th, and 12th, we get right back into this. So anytime you see a trough north of a ridge and the ISO heights or ISO bars, you can think of them either way, become really squeezed and tight in one area, that means a tight height gradient and tight pressure gradient, which means strong winds. And what this is doing is already by that point, it's going to drive the storm systems across the United States closer to the 49th parallel than it would be much farther to the south. And this is going to be the breakdown of the heat that's in the west for part of the west. Let's call more of the Pacific Northwest. And it also is signaling a pattern shift which could return more storms to the mid part of the United States and east. So we get out there to the 13th, 14th, and 15th. We just continue to see above average temperatures, but an active storm track, especially as we get into week 2 across our northern tier of the U.S. And as we just kind of sample this around the planet, we're looking for any evidence of the pattern, ramping up, breaking down, and how many waves there are in the upper atmosphere. And the reality of it is out there about 10 to 12 days, we just continue to get a setup that just delivers stuff like this. And it's not just in the artificial intelligence, which is what I've been showing you first in these last several videos, but it's also in the ensembles. If we go back and look out there, there's clearly a story to this where we're getting flow coming back in that direction. So that's a bit of a stormier setup. That's also a lot of heat that's going to move into this area. And typically following this, as we get just a bit deeper into summer, this is the type of pattern that if I see in late spring starts to make me think we could see a lot more ridging in the central part of the United States going forward. And we've kind of made that case, but we need to look at it again today because as I get through this forecast, we're going to walk you again through the results of this, what this means, and then I'm going to stretch it out to some longer range stuff because we do have brand new data from the European model. Came in last night, and I'm anxious to show it to you in a little bit here. So if you only want the long range, just fast forward till you get over to here. Okay, big picture. Over the next 7 days, this is what the European operational run suggests in terms of precipitation anomalies or differences from normal. So clearly quite stormy still in parts of Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri. That's been this area that there'll be this lingering frontal boundary on which we're going to have enough moisture coming from the Gulf to make storms here. A bit farther to the north, we're drier. Now just remember, I'm saying drier and not dry. We will have at times storms that cascade through this area. You'll see that in some of the high-res models. But I am also watching the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico right now because the European model, in addition to the GFS, has got better rising motion in this area and possibly the risk of something coming out of the tropics. It's a difficult thing to assess now. There's going to be a stalled out frontal boundary that gets down here pretty far to the south. And when that occurs, we could get some, you get the genesis of a tropical system on a front. So it's a little bit different than frontogenesis. It's tropical genesis on that. But otherwise, week 2, as the jet stream comes back across a little bit farther to the north, we see generally a stormy pattern. And while you see a drier striping through this area, again, the risk on being drier is there, but not dry, not bone dry during that time frame. I still think we finish most of June with thunderstorm activity. There's no reason to shut it all off given the moisture that's in the soil. So just here in the last 24 hours, locally some very heavy rainfall as the low curls up here out of parts of Manitoba into Ontario and continues to press east. So locally some very heavy rainfall in this area. And I wanted to show you though on satellite, just as the sun was rising, on the back side of this morning, there's quite a bit of dry air that's worked its way in here. So for many, this is going to be a very pleasant day in this particular area because of this dry air. This is a dew point temperature map showing you that dry air that's moved in. If we stand this dew point temperature animation and just play it forward, you'll notice how far to the north, even into this weekend, the moisture makes it. See this? So there's still flow bringing this into this area. But drier air here, drier air there, that's where the lingering front will be on which we could expect to see some storms fueled by this moisture. So as we just play it forward into Sunday and Monday, can you see the front? It's right there. That's where the boundary and the moisture is. So we'll watch where the storms feed on this moisture going into this weekend and into early next week. Now by Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, very, very pleasant, beautiful weather coming in here, but already we start to see the recovery of the moisture in the central U.S. See this by next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and that's what we're going to feed on for storms as we start to approach the middle of this month. So we'll watch that carefully. Now, many of you are probably going, what the heck? I mean, it's not cold, it's dry in this area. This is a measure of moisture. But this is our Great Basin and our Intermountain West and our Desert Southwest. These values are supposed to be this low. This is the dry spot in our country. All right, from there, let's go and have a look at today's all hazards weather map. We still have the excessive heat watches, advisories, warnings out throughout parts of the Southwest. Still strong winds being dealt with across parts of North Dakota, getting over to the Red River Valley of the North. And we have the flooding issues that are still ongoing after the incredibly wet weather that's been endured for 2.5 months down here, but just the recent storms. If we take a look at the Storm Prediction Center, again, a day of only marginal risk. So we'll keep an eye on a couple of different regions here along the East Coast, down into Florida, which could be receiving a lot of very heavy rainfall soon, and then back here into parts of Texas and Oklahoma. But we do have a slight risk already issued by the SPC for tomorrow in Nebraska, northern Kansas, and we'll take a look again. That's where that boundary is going to sit. The moisture recovers. We'll talk more about that in a second. Day 3, just for completeness, watch again on that stalled out front in this area for the risk of those storms. Much drier air to the north, but still plenty of moisture feeding in from the south. Okay, so this is just a current look at the radar this morning. And just right up here, let's actually get an update. Should have a couple more animation frames in there. There we go. Yeah. So this is late this morning, just as we get about 7 o'clock. And I'm just using this to understand if the model was initialized well. So through about 7:10, this is how things shaped up. And at 7 a.m., this is what the NAM looks like. I got to admit, that's pretty good. I think it had a decent initialization, seeing things lined up here. So playing it through the rest of the day, the low curls up here this afternoon, this evening. This is why we have our stronger storms to be watching here. And then you can also see over in Texas as well. Tonight, that's where we could see a cluster of storms explode, where there's still plenty of moisture in the atmosphere. Getting into the day on Friday, early Friday morning through midday Friday, playing into the afternoon. Do you note how we just see clusters of storms trying to get into this area? I'll question how much dry air is in there to kind of limit this, but there's still some storms coming in this region. And we'll have to see if we can get that cluster to go through Wisconsin, which has been extremely wet for the last couple of months. So to see that moisture coming through there is not what a lot of folks want to see. But as I mentioned, the high-res NAM is going to struggle with the pattern going forward. It really is. And just make sure that you don't let the color bar overwhelm you with what it could possibly deliver. But you can see, coming over that ridge, we have the potential for some storm clusters, and Storm Prediction Center's identified this, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get some lighter rain farther to the north here. Okay, in terms of a 7-day forecast, let's get there. That's full screen. This would be the European models, artificial intelligence 7-day forecast. Let's go ahead and add that to the blend of models. Now notice how light the rain is in the blend of models, but the artificial intelligence got a bit more in there. Important differences here. The WPC, very similar to the NBM, showing us our best chances for the continuation of storms here and then down into Florida. And then as the low curls its way up toward New England, but a drier go of it in this area. And this is the European model 7-day. So again, overall a similar look as the 3 previous models, and the GFS is here. So a little bit different, quite a bit different actually, with what comes through late. And we're going to go have a look at that here in a second. I wanted to give you some probability maps though. This is the best chance at getting an inch according to the European ensemble over the next 7 days. But if we stick to the drier side of it, should get a new run in there, yeah. If we go back to the 0Z, they always happen right when I'm recording. That's where we think the best chance at over the next week we could stay under a ½ inch is, according to the run. So the models here, again, probability of under a ½ inch. If we do this again one more time, that's the 10-day chance of over an inch. All right, this is what's compelling. The best rising motion for the next 15 days lives here. And maybe to see it differently, you can look at a couple different maps, but the idea is the best rising motion is sitting in this area. And why I'm thinking about this is because some of the models are hinting at some tropical depression development, both in the East Pacific and in the West Atlantic, getting into the Caribbean. And I just bring that up because we're keeping an eye on, well, just watch the GFS here in a few moments. Because as we walk through these next couple of days, no surprises here. Again, storms coming through. You can see the models, like I said, trying to bring some wetter weather through, Wisconsin right there. There's some storms that could possibly roll through. But that's Saturday, getting into Sunday and Monday. Now, at this point, the front is lingering. And you can see the wetter conditions through the weekend into early next week there. But then there is a weak low that the GFS picked up on first. The European did not, and it's rolling through the Canadian Prairie. Could swipe a front through the northern plains as we work our way into Monday and Tuesday of next week. And then what we'll be watching is this. By next Thursday, some of the models are trying to crank up something in the Gulf of Mexico. It's kind of there in both models. There's a lingering front, and it's trying to do something. And meanwhile, we're out here to the 14th, meaning that the jet stream is starting to push systems across the northern tier of the United States at that time as well. So we'll watch the Caribbean and we'll watch the northern tier of the U.S., but I think we recover back into a more stormy pattern as we press forward. All right, what about week 2? You can start to see that all 3 models are picking up on, this and something down here. So let's just watch it. Just understand we got to keep an eye on this. I just want to caution everybody, you see a lot of the drier colors in some of these maps, but it's important to just stress here that drier, not dry. That's all. I just want to make sure you see that. Now, there's going to be some places that miss rain. That's how it always is. But I don't want to misread this as just being wide open dryness where no one gets a drop of rain if you're inside of these colors. Temperature-wise, frost map. Love seeing that. Just out. Temperatures. High temperatures today on Thursday, another scorcher in the west, as we've been talking about, hot in southern Texas. That's Friday's highs, cool around the eastern Great Lakes through the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And this is when we start to break this pattern down. The 10th, 11th, 12th, you start to see that warmth pressing back into the central part of the United States. And by day 5 through 10, we see it opening up. And day 10 through 15, it seems to be sitting in here. This is when we've kind of broken down that positive PNA pattern and sending ridges more into the central United States. Finally, the European model has kind of bit into this. This is day 5 through 10, working out there day 10 through 15. So I like to see that overall kind of recovery back to a similar view from the GFS and the European. So where do we take this? We take it here. I've been providing you updates of this every week, or every day. We've been looking out there for the time period of June 15 to July 15 at the forecast for total precipitation anomalies. And again, it's to stress that the European model wants to anchor some heat here and give a lot of probably ridge-riding storms over the top of this while we have a lot of activity coming into the tropics. Now, I'm not saying hurricanes, I'm saying convection. And that really seems to be showing up in all of our longer range forecast models through mid-July. So again, this is a story more about the upper level flow, which if we take you out there, seems to favor, ridging that anchors maybe closer to the 100th meridian rather than the continental divide or, along the west coast. So it's going to be that 588 line. That's what we've all been trained to understand. That 588 line seems to be the corridor over which you get stormy conditions. So, but understand that this is going to be not just stormy, but it's going to be hot. It's going to be a hot and stormy stretch in through that area. And this means we have a setup where there could be some flash drought, where you get some areas that just, they miss on the rains. Storms come through, they deliver locally heavy rains, but miss in other areas. So what about beyond this? What about just getting out there and looking at the remainder of summer? Well, last night we did get new information from the European model. Their projection for Niña 3.4, which is out in the middle of the Pacific, still kind of opens up a pretty wide spread, but we're looking at, if we took the ensemble average, very weak La Niña conditions going into this fall. Now, to be honest, I'm just going to say it again. La Niña is there, but this is not the dominant factor. It was kind of like last fall, right? We kept saying El Niño, El Niño, El Niño, but something else was playing, the bigger role. And I think that's how it's going to be until we get to, almost the end of this year. This is the bigger role. This very warm water here with the cooler water to the south and the cooler water to the north has not been well predicted by the models. We call that the negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and the negative phase of the PMM, Pacific Meridional Mode. We continue to see displaced Bermuda High and very warm water to its south. So that whole narrative hasn't necessarily changed much at this point. But be honest, I care far less about what La Niña is doing and more about what this could be doing to produce high pressure in this area, robbing the atmosphere of some momentum and flow, and end up giving us, a high pressure cell here, possibly a high pressure cell here, and another one out in the open Atlantic later. Or maybe this one stays displaced and moved. I'm not sure. So we've been watching these ocean temperatures very carefully. In terms of the PDO, most forecasts did not predict this. If I just zoom in here on these most recent years, the current value, at least the one from April, has really dropped back off again. We had kind of projected, guys, it's normal, kind of a 5-year swing that does something like that. So the thinking was that over the next 18 months, we'd be going back toward PDO neutral conditions and probably spend some time there like we did back between 16 and 19. But lately that PDO signal's dropped back off here in May, and it's now down to, almost -3, which if you look recently, there's only been a few times lately that we've gotten down that far. And last time being in October of 2021, just to kind of think this through. So the big questions become, how much of a player is this? Because the models have not predicted this. So this is a map valid on June the 4th. If you go back and look at the forecast from March, by the month of June, models were expecting that to fill in. Remember, I was looking at that. I was like, if that fills in, oh, big West Coast region. That was the story we've had for months. But that was March's projection. This was April's projection for June. This was May's projection for June. And now we look at the June data, and it's got the cooler in there. Now, as we play it forward, there's July, August, September. Now it's kind of keeping that negative PDO signal around better. But we're asking, all right, if that's the case, what's the resulting precipitation pattern? So if we come in here to the U.S., we'll do seasonal anomalies. We'll look at 3-month stretches. It still has June, July, and August stormy for a big section of the Midwest. The risk of that Mexico drought, it still has it kind of funneling in from the Western Plains to the Great Basin. And it's got drier air in parts of the Appalachian Mountains into the southeast as well, which is something that it did trend drier on for this time frame. So just to show you that, this was the previous run for this time period. That was That was June, July, August from the previous run. And here's the newest. So where does it go? That's July, August, September. August, September, October, and September, October, November. Now, we just take models at face value. We look for patterns, and that's all we're going to do with this. We're not going to make any bigger story out of it than what it is, but the model still continues to show this for the summer time frame. And I don't want to add anything to it. What I do want to tell you is, if these ocean temperatures do behave in the manner they are right now, I think this still poses risk for a very hot but stormy summer east of the Rocky Mountains, all the way to the East Coast. And that's what I think we're going to have to continue to contend with. There is still a scenario that we build West Coast ridging. There's definitely a scenario that builds that. But as it stands, this is the way I think things shape up. Okay, back into the near term but bigger view here. We still have the excessive heat that is in this part of Russia's grain belts. You can see the very hot conditions that are expected to hit southern Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, northern Argentina. And if we look at the precipitation patterns, models continue to be reluctant to put moisture into that area. We just don't see it. If there's storms, water's evaporating pretty quickly out of them. And you take note of southern Brazil. It's still showing up drier, but maybe some autumn rains down here in Argentina. So I'll be watching for the next 4 months what's going on across the Sahel, at kicking systems off here soon. We'll start to look at that the dust that could be out there in the open Atlantic as a indicator on the tropical season. But for some reason, this tropical season seems to be favoring some homegrown possibilities, which we've not seen really since 2020 in terms of getting some big storms out of the Gulf. So all that's on the table. We'll continue to analyze it, and I'll be sure to report it back to you. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.